And we'll kick it off. Hello and welcome to the DFI podcast, where we go deep on Web3 infrastructure and services. Don Gossen, thank you so much for joining us, sir. Pleasure to have you. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys. It's been a minute since we last had a chance to chat. When was it? When was the last time? San Francisco?
Stanford Blockchain Conference in 2023. What was that? August? September?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, very end of August. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Wes was trying to tell us about Eigenlayer, and I think he confused himself more than the two of us.
You restake your stake, and then you can stake your restake. You just keep staking until you got your
recursive staking.
Oh, I got that first.
Jinx. My daughter's got me back into the Jinx game, guys.
You got to have it. We'll get to Eigenlayer for sure. But you got a lot of history that we actually, and even me, I don't even know all of your history. I want to hear, maybe you could just give us a little bit of background, how you got started in Web 2 and your transition to Web 3 to get us some context. And Ishan and I were talking, we're all working in very similar spaces. So we've got some tactical stuff we want to ask you about as well.
Sure.
But maybe you could just give us a little, high level, how you got into the space.
Okay. So background, Canadian, studied engineering at university, then went into commodities trading, doing risk, which was pretty boring, to be honest. I parlayed that into basically a career in consulting as a subject matter expert in data and analytics. So I cut my teeth in the risk game doing the analytics stuff and applied machine learning, and then parlayed that into basically almost a decade and a half of IT consulting. So traveled the world building data estates for some of the biggest companies on the planet. HSBC, L'Oreal, AXA, Mizuho, Sharp. So got a broad exposure to both the data and the analytics side, cut my teeth through the whole big data explosion. And then in 2016, I was at a conference where a future business partner and co-founder Dimitri de Jong was giving a talk about using blockchains for provenance integrity. Everything else at the conference was totally over my head, and this stuff was all right, now I understand what he's talking about, or what somebody's talking about. So dug into it, and one thing led to another, and joined him and a couple other guys, Bruce Pond and Trent McConaughey, to co-found Ocean Protocol in late 2017. So did that. Yeah.
That's a really, you guys were early. I mean, people may forget that, but can you tell us?
Yeah, we had the meme going strong back then. It was decentralized data for AI, and building the protocol for that.
Wow.
So that was, I remember a buddy of mine told his brother, who was he was into crypto, what we were doing. And he was like, could you throw another buzzword at this project? This was back in, 2017. So yeah, it was pretty true. But, we saw the benefits of leveraging the infrastructure, right? The foundations of Web3 for provenance integrity and attribution, both from a data provisioning point of view, but also from the model side of things, right? And I've just been kind of exploring this design space ever since. More recently, focused on Nevermind.
Well, before we leave that story on Ocean Protocol, because they're an important point of history in your history and Web3 history. Is there anything you would say that you guys got right at Ocean, or anything, and also things that you maybe lessons learned that weren't obvious about the economics of data and Web3 that you took into future projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the project is endured, so we got something right. It wasn't a flash in the pan like a lot of contemporaries were at that point. I think it was way ahead of its time, like a lot of projects at that point. I think what was done well was like testing the boundaries, applying attributes of decentralized finance, DeFi, into things like, price discovery on data sets and that sort of thing. Being as early as it was, I think there were quite a few things that could have been done differently. But all in all, like I wouldn't trade it. It was definitely a super interesting experience. It was incredibly stressful. You're kind of going through it now with EigenLayer. But I think now, like it's much more constrained in terms of like the attack surface in particular. The way I described, so we did every like funding mechanism under the sun when we did Ocean. So we started in 2018, early 2018, with a pre-launch, as you would, right? A pre-ICO,
back in the
pre-sale.
day. Yeah. That was a move, of course.
And then like somebody asked me what it's like, and I told them it's like doing a bake sale on a global scale, and anybody can set up a booth to sell your cookies, even if they're unaffiliated. And you have no control, like there's no quality control on this, right? This is what it was like back then. I don't know if you guys like remember going through the whole ICO hype cycle, but like we literally had a guy on our team fielding questions on Facebook Live, because that was like the best interface at the time, the least corruptible, the least prone to getting hacked, because like you couldn't use Telegram. Discord was basically non-existent at that point. It was so hard to communicate with people that we got a guy during our pre-sale on Facebook Live answering streaming questions as they came in. It was pretty funny.
Wow.
We've got it so good these days.
Yeah, exactly.
Dude, that wasn't even that long ago. I mean, it feels like eternity ago, but it was 6 years ago, right? Like so much has changed in 6 years in this space.
I will tell you what I will never do again, and that is have a baby the week before any kind of event like that. So my daughter was born on the Friday. We did the sale on like the Wednesday or Thursday the week after. And that wasn't a great experience. Wouldn't you? Like having a daughter was fantastic. Doing it coinciding with the
holy cow,
the pre-sale. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that to anybody.
Dude.
Yeah.
Just double up the excitement. That's amazing. But you made it through. And in fairness, like, a lot of those ICOs were maybe just a white paper. You guys were actually pushing through it. You built something at the end of it, which is a big deal.
Yeah, and I mean, our objectives were to get something out that was, productive and get it out in a timely fashion. So we launched the first version in 2019, and then it coincided with the ICO and then the subsequent IEO. I think the main takeaway there, like the biggest learning, was how you can, if you don't do things properly, you can create this state where you actually you end up with two separate products that don't have a lot of cohesion, right? So I think my main takeaway was having that understanding that you have to, you can go one of two paths. You can go and just, try and pump the value of the token and decouple that entirely from the product itself and the overall vision, or you can focus on the product and at the detriment of the token. It's very hard to couple those two things together. And they're, the most successful projects are obviously the ones that are able to do that.
Do you have any, tips or, learnings from like the previous time on how to couple those? Because I think, when we talk to a lot of, especially when I talk to a lot of Web3 investors and founders, like they kind of pretend to care, the investors like pretend to care about the product, but really care about the token, right? So their advice comes from everything on like how to maximizing like a 1 year or a 2 year window of the token price. When I talk to founders, right, other founders, I went through Orange DAO, so was always connected to a lot of other founders. They care a lot about like, I mean, no one's silly, right? They're not like, oh, I don't care about the token, but it's like, I want to bring like real value to my customers, whether those customers are in business or in consumer. That's what founders really care about. And they're like, I have to figure out this token thing, and I don't have any experience in it. And like, I'm afraid that like, you know, in crypto, if your token doesn't take off, even if you've built an amazing product with value to users, a lot of times your company ends up dying. So for listeners out there who are founders, do you have any advice or learnings?
So I think what's nice about now, like the stage of the industry that we're in, at least a plurality, if not a majority of investors, and specifically like the VC ones, I don't think they sugarcoat it at this stage. I think they are kind of like, they're of the mindset of like, we want the token, we want the liquidity, we think that this is important. Some of whom will actually tell you like, there's a likelihood that your product is never going to fly. Do I believe in this team, and do you understand that you need to make this token work on behalf of your community, regardless of what the original mission and or vision of your product might have been, right? So I think the nice part, like if you rewind 7 years, it was this conversation with VCs and actually like John Q. Public, that was the retail that was coming in and buying these tokens. A lot of like lip service around, oh yeah, the vision is so important in the product, but at the end of the day, it was just like, no, we want liquidity on this token, right? So I think as a builder, what you have to realize is like, if you're going to get into Web3, you're getting into it because of that dynamic. Like the capital infusion bit is so strong and the efficacy is there, it's proven, right? That you may get into a state where you have to support that token at the expense of the product, right? As long as you're comfortable with that being a potential eventuality, then I think it's something you should do. If you're doing it more so from like you're convicted on the product side and the vision, and this is just purely like a fundraising mechanism, then maybe you should consider other means of raising capital. Because the likelihood is you're not going to raise enough to actually get your product to the state where you want to get it to. And then you have the added, I think, the added complexity of dealing with all these stakeholders now that are much more vocal than like, you don't get the luxury of showing up to an annual board meeting, right? And having people walk up to a mic and scream you down. You're being bombarded on Discord and Telegram and everywhere, right? Crypto Twitter. So
yes.
Yeah.
It's not prepared investor questions.
Yeah, I think that's
exactly.
That's some really good advice, because it's like, I once read this article. It's called "The Token is the Product." I wonder if I can share my screen. I don't know. Oh yeah, I'll quickly share my screen. And it's like, it was like a very, very, it just came out like 2 months ago, right? The token is the product. And they talk about how like, this is like a pretty common saying: first time founders focus on product, second time founders focus on distribution in the Web2 world. But like, this is even an interesting point that like a lot of first time founders in crypto don't think about like, the token enough, because that's what drives like a lot of community engagement, interest in the product and stuff like that. So I highly recommend, if you guys haven't read it, right, definitely read it. For viewers, I'm sharing the screen, definitely check it out. For listeners, again, I'm sharing the screen. You guys, I think anyone who's a crypto founder should read this blog post about how like, it basically comes down to like, when you are building a crypto product, you are building both you're building two businesses. You're building your actual business of what the product accomplishes for the user, and you're building a crypto business. And because that the crypto business is the incentivization layer for a lot of us for like, getting people to act in a certain way, doing the right thing, like, having long-term value of the network, using, tokens to create liquidity or fundraising, or, I think we were talking about this before we started, like using that crypto tokens to, spend money to gain more users, right? Even if you're spending money, but like taking over the market. So I think it's a phenomenal read.
Yeah, I think with a token, you have this product that has like innate distribution in it, right? And if you're coming into this space, what you have to recognize is there is this component that isn't just the platform or the app or the network, the technology that you're building like like you would in a traditional tech business, right? You also have this added, capital infusion mechanism, which can amplify that distribution, but it can also kill your project, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that it's like um, a complicated thread to needle, but it's definitely non-trivial. And I think what you have to do when you get into Web3 is just recognize that aspect of it. Look, I think we see a lot of like the result of failing to have that recognition, and then the animosity or negativity that gets brought or that manifests because of that failure. So, I mean, Sean, you're in SF, right? Like, there's a lot of ex-crypto builders from the last cycle that pivoted into AI and now subsequently hate Web3, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because they had a crappy experience doing
Exactly.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's in part a result of the fact that, like, maybe they launched a token and there was a lack of that recognition. I also think that, we've gone through this evolution, and people that are now getting into this space have a bit more wherewithal because there's just a ton more information, right? And they've probably experienced it firsthand. When I got in like 2016, it was literally like flying blind, right? You had to just meet people and question. There wasn't a lot that was written down,
You guys
this
are
type
writing
of
the script.
Yeah, man, it was a bit complicated. It also added to the excitement, right? Because it was the Wild West, and now this like burgeoning space of AI is now like the new emergent Wild West. But then you throw in this cross section of Web3, and it's even more exciting, in my opinion. But yeah.
Well, that's actually a really good foray. So if we take the back in the timeline, Ocean Protocol doing well, having fun there, but then there's probably some problems or maybe some things that are interesting for you that motivate you to think about Nevermind. Can you give us kind of the story of like, what was the passion, what was the motivation or the opportunity that you saw?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, exiting Ocean, it was more just needed a change of pace, right? Like, the reality is I had a daughter right before we did a pre-sale, and then built this thing and did an ICO and an IO all within like about a year, right, in duration. And in retrospect, the reality was like just sort of burnt out at the end of that cycle. So it was like, I got to take a step back, and like I still want to do what I'm working on, but I don't want to, getting death threats on Telegram isn't a fun work day, So it was like, let's take a step back from some of this stuff. So then fell back onto what was kind of tried and true and very well tested for me, which was like consulting. So then me and Demi and our VP of engineering at Ocean, Itor, who I've been working together, like this is our 9th year working together. We decided to we started a company called Kiko, which was focused on helping other Web3 builders build their projects, whether it was like the tech or the token or whatever. And did that for, the better part of 3 years. And amongst that, because of my background and where I came from and the issues that I had from a technical point of view, building these data estates, what I used to tell people is I was trying to solve 4 pretty basic questions in my prior life. It was where's the data coming from? Where's it going? Who's using it? And what are they doing with it? And using a blockchain really helps manifest the answers, or at least the properties that are going to help you answer those 4 questions. And so I still had the passion to follow that type of solutioning. And one thing led to another, and we ended up kind of back on this narrative around Ocean, data, ML, proper provenance and attribution, and how you bring all of these things together, in large part because that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. That's what Itor's been doing for the last 20 years. That's what Demi's been doing, so it's just natural. That's what we're comfortable with. And then, what we discovered in this AI renaissance that we're seeing is a very discrete need from a builder point of view to capture the productive value of these AI, in particular AI agents or services that are being developed that are more than just a model per se. And there being a lack of technology and tooling that can enable that commercialization or monetization of those solutions. So around actually the time that we last saw one another, there was kind of a bit of a eureka that actually this payments piece for AI agents in particular is something that at that point there was smoke. So it was we need to look where the fire's coming from. And over the course of the latter half of that year, that fire became very apparent that the existing infrastructure that is out there falls short. And then if you look at the trajectory, if you're like me and you believe that there's going to be trillions of AIs that are created over the next, half decade to decade, that the infrastructure that exists is incompatible and won't scale to support that type of ecosystem. So that's where we're at right now, building the AI payments protocol.
Very cool. So you're here today building this AI payments protocol. Can you share more about how the payment protocol works? And how's it how are you using blockchain
Sure.
and crypto, and just kind of, by the way, I 100% agree with the trillions of AI agents working with each other. So yeah, I definitely agree that this payments platform or infrastructure doesn't exist for what we need today. But yeah, would love to learn more about that.
Yeah. So I think that so let me just preface this with what we're building isn't rocket science, but it's non-trivial, and I think at this point it's burdensome, right? So I'll unpack that a little bit, but I think what you have to understand is how, in particular, an AI agent works. So if you've been following the newest stuff from OpenAI, right? Chat 4.0 and stuff, or GPT 4.0. What they're doing is taking a model and then cobbling it together with a bunch of different underlying services and then orchestrating the utility that's going to manifest out of that thing, right? So what's been going on for the last, in particular, 12 and a little bit longer, 18 months, those that had the wherewithal have started to like build their own version of that. And so what you've got is you have to look at the way that these agents or services manifest, right? And the way that they're interacted with versus how like a contemporary software solution works. So normally it's like a relatively known static style query that goes into the system, right? And then there is a relatively static response, right? You go to, for instance, a website that's like Stripe enabled, you're going to buy a t-shirt, right? The input is, the intent is I want to buy this t-shirt, and the output is a static product, which is the t-shirt, right? So it's like relatively easy to build a settlement layer around, as well as understand like the productive capacity of that solution, right? Money goes in, t-shirt comes out. If you look at these agents, you have this scenario where, okay, Ishan, you build an agent, and then Wes, you and I are going to use it, right? And the nature of Ishan's agent, it's dynamic in nature, right? So I'm a simple user, Wes, you're a power user. I put in a simple response. Ishan, maybe under the hood, just for sake of simplicity, you're using like the GPT series of models through an OpenAI API to provide my inference, right? So what you've got is an ingestion capability. You're running something on the back end that decomposes my prompt and then determines, oh, I only need to invoke GPT-3 in order to provide an inference for Don's prompt. Versus Wes, who comes in, he's using the same agent that you're providing, Ishan, but your request is multimodal in nature, Wes. You want to get text and images out, right? So the constraint there is, well, you've got to use GPT-4 in this case. Your prompt and my prompt are completely different, right? Both in what we're prompting and then in the nature of what we're requesting. You want text and images, I just want a text response. And then how Ishan's agent responds to those requests is variable. And so it's this dynamic input that's handled by the variable nature of the back end of the system itself, coupled with the fact that that variability has a different price point to it. You need to translate that over to a cost to you and I. So what we enable is for Ishan to effectively set the initial parameters for access to his agent. Can be, I mean, the most basic is just price. The second is like the time period that you would have access and or the number of requests that you can make. And we enable this through the issuance of credits, which are NFTs, and we call them smart subscriptions, right? So Ishan, you register this agent through its API or its set of APIs. And with that registration process, you dictate that you're going to allow entry if I and Wes purchase 10,000 credits for $10, right? That's the first sort of token gating component. And then each of those underlying sub-services that this agent is based on, in your case, it's this GPT series of models. You can set an indicative redemption criteria when those models are invoked. So in the case of GPT-3, you set a redemption criteria of 10 credits if that model is invoked, versus GPT-4, 400 credits. So now if we go back to this scenario where I submit my simple response and it uses your agent uses GPT-3 to give me an inference, out of my pool of 10,000 credits that I bought for $10, 10 credits are deducted. Out of Wes's 10,000 credits that he purchased for $10 because his request invoked GPT-4, 400 credits are redeemed. And so it's what we're doing is a few things. We're enabling basically what I call this system of unit accounting, which sits between the back end solution and the metering component of that, and translates that metering through the system of unit accounting into the settlement. And the benefit of doing this with credits is that you're getting like as close to real time, as close to real time usage and pricing model as possible without actually having to invoke that, right? So you know the issue with
you don't have to swipe a Visa card every time.
You don't have to swipe a Visa card every time. But when you also, if you think about, you don't want to have a pure usage-based pricing model, because then, Wes, you and I don't know how much we're going to get charged at the end of the cycle.
Each agent interaction is unknown. It's like,
exactly.
Well, okay, yeah.
And as Sean, you don't know if Wes and I are deadbeats. So you invoice us and we just say, no, we're not paying. So in this case, we're bridging that gap, right? Where it's not, you're not having to put funds into escrow or swipe a credit card every time, but you're also not invoking a pure usage-based pricing model. It's kind of the best of both worlds. Yeah, and so that's a pretty significant benefit. Anyway.
So agents, I mean, you're right. Like that, it's funny. Like you see, even like some of the top data scientists now, agentic machine learning is becoming like the topic du jour. Are you seeing that agents also need to have their own balance of currency to spend, whether it's cryptocurrency or otherwise, or to do their job, to book this flight, to purchase this and do that? Are they going to have their own, like, in addition to having gated access to data and agent services? How far does that powers of the agent need to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think the natural way to measure the productivity of something is, to measure the value that it either consumes or creates, right? And the way to do that is through, transacting, in our case, like through a currency, right? So I think we're getting to a stage where right now there is probably a majority, maybe just a plurality of like hobbyist builders that are moving towards wanting to commercialize their agents, but it's still quite hobbyist in nature, right? The issue there, what we've seen, where this fire that I kind of spoke about earlier was, absent of technology like what we're building, what's happening is a couple of things, and this goes back to the comment I made that what we're doing isn't overly, like, it's not rocket science, but it's non-trivial. So I explained the non-trivial component of it, but it's also burdensome, right? So, Wes, let's say you build a GPT that I want to use. The way that you would manifest that usage right now is like you'd use your OpenAI API, and that would charge you on a monthly basis, but you're effectively underwriting my usage, right? So then the question becomes, okay, how do I avoid that scenario where I'm actually making money, or at least coming out at like net neutral on this? So you need a means to charge me because I want to use your agent that you built, right? So then maybe you use Stripe, for example.
Yeah, right.
And then you get into this scenario where I'm Wes in this case with the Sean, and I'm a power user, and I just churn through, your credits on OpenAI.
It's very coarse.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not a good. Because Stripe isn't set up to handle the dynamic and variable nature of what's going on. There are other builders, like organizations out there, Metronome's one that's doing this. They do this like metering and settlement piece on behalf of, for example, OpenAI and like Databricks, et cetera. But they're like the closed source centralized organization. right? So where we also see value here is like in a sophisticated team that is building something of value, and they have engineers that can build this thing, but it's actually a distraction, right? So for example, we're the payments solution for OLAS, the autonomous project, right?
Oh, very
And
nice. Love those guys.
you know, the issue for them was like they just want to build these agents. They want to build the best, effectively the best of breed framework for agent development. A component of that is the commercialization of them, but because it's non-trivial, it becomes a distraction. So not only do you have to build this thing, but then you have to ultimately support it, right? And then you have to think about if you know, like you said, Ashan, if you believe in this evolution where we're going to see trillions of agents, imagine each one of those having its own like default protocol for transacting. The interoperability constraints will be massive. So the reality is there needs to be a protocol that they all somewhat conform to that enables the transactability. And what we're calling this is like, we're going to see the evolution. Effectively, these trillions of agents are wholly new consumers that are going to change commerce forever. We're going to move from e-commerce into what we're calling AI commerce. And it's just the natural evolution of how things will, how things will come to fruition, in our opinion. And so we need this engine that's going to power AI commerce. And a substrate to that is the protocol.
I love it. Well, so Don, there was a similar topic that Ishan and I were chatting about yesterday. While we have you, it would be very interesting to pick your brain on this, related to AI, related to agents, and related to like particularly the training aspect of these AI agents. You know, you worked in the data space for a long time. We've worked in the data space more recently as well. There's a number of data solutions in the space. There's IPFS, there's Filecoin, there's a bunch of different options where, you know, our users care about decentralization. Our users, especially for training, also care about some degree of privacy or access control lists for their data set. And so coming from the enterprise world, you have private data sets, you can train it, it's good. I lock it under my, my domain. In the crypto world, it's all open. Are you seeing any solutions emerge that are sort of the best of both worlds for people that are building in this space that want to build these agents? Are there compromises to be made? I don't know if you've seen
give a little
anything.
bit more
I think,
context.
yeah, go ahead.
To give a little bit more context, basically, like you think about Filecoin, right? It's the equivalent of cold storage, right? The retrieval markets are super slow or non-existent. Retrievability is just not great, right? And like when we use centralized cloud, right? AWS, GCP, all of that is what we call hot storage, right? Unencrypted, available, and unencrypted at rest. You know, maybe it's encrypted at transit, unencrypted at rest, available super fast and super cheap storage, so that, you know, when a user makes a request, this static request you were talking about, right, makes a request in their in whatever app they're using, to get some data back, it's back in, you know, hundreds of milliseconds, right, or less. Whereas like Web3, like Filecoin is great for like long-term storage, but like we haven't, Wes and I were talking, is like, what would it, you know, what would a decentralized hot storage layer look like? Or, you know, so that people, you know, and maybe not in like a database perspective, but more of like, you know, a file system or a database where like developers can store data on like the decentralized web, but have like millisecond or 100 millisecond type of response for applications. So yeah, if you're seeing anything, and if not, like what would it take to build it?
I mean, I think what I'm seeing, there's this evolution. So if we just focus on like the AI Web3 cross section, the initial focus, there's a lot of infrastructure at play here, right? And the initial focus was on like the hardware, the compute, and then on the models. And then the next natural evolution, what I'm seeing a lot of now is like Ocean 2.0, right? Data for AI. So, you know, like Grass is one of those. And I think, so Sean, I think what you have to look at is like what are the objectives that you're trying to build towards, or what are the constraints that you're trying to impose or whatever, right? So if censorship resistance is something that you're actually a feature that you want to enable, then having like this massively replicated cold storage solution like a Filecoin is useful, right? But the reality is that most users are not overly concerned about censorship resistance. So that feature in a use case doesn't really expose itself, right? I think what's more novel and useful is less like the data itself being decentralized and more the analytics component. So like leveraging context data, to your point, in microsecond fashion in real time to feed into an AI. The protocol or standard for that being decentralized. So the three of us can be like broadly distributed around the globe and use the same the same protocol for the access and retrieval of that information. I think that's a very useful proposition. Then the question becomes, how do you do that? Are you then subsequently like, are you moving the data? Are you taking it, at rest and moving it in flight and then putting it at rest somewhere else, which seems a bit redundant to me? What seems like a more likely, optimistic and efficient use case would be like the federated application of analytics and more specifically the models at the point of rest, right? So stuff like what Bacalao was working on. Whether or not that storage is in infrastructure that's decentralized, then like I don't know where I don't know how I don't know if the commercial model is actually there for that, to be honest. And then there's also there's like the commercial aspect of data storage generally, which is it's a commodity business, it's a race to the bottom, right? So in conjunction with the application of like federated learning in like an AI derived environment, I could see providing a utility like a Filecoin for free where it piggybacks off of, it charges like the AI service for that standard or that protocol so that it's easier for the AIs to actually access the information. But other than that, I think like decentralized storage is a bit, I don't know. I still have a lot of questions on that use case proposition.
Very
Fair enough.
interesting. I actually seem to agree with you on that. And I think that like, but it seems that compute is not there yet. Like compute is not a commodity yet.
No, not on the AI front for sure. It's not there yet.
Correct, not on the AI front. But like, also just not on if compute was a commodity, like even on like minimal like CPU heavy tasks that have nothing to ever to do with GPUs and AI, I feel like you wouldn't see the intense amount of competition there is in terms of like the thousands of data centers that are coming up every year, the infrastructure needed to provide all of that, right? And like people,
I don't know if that's a hardware problem though. I feel like that's more that's the abstraction. It's the abstraction layer that's complicated. It's orchestration that's difficult, right? Like if you knew where the data set was and you could compute that at the edge on somebody's phone, as opposed to like go through the task of from the app, uploading it into your data center and then storing it there. If that was all finely indexed and had, proper provenential integrity across it, then I don't know. I don't know if there is such a driver to like amass this data in these consolidated structures within data centers and stuff like that.
But that
Like there
that only
may
makes
be
sense.
efficacy to pushing it to the edge.
That makes a lot of sense for like inference type workloads or anything where like let's say like a user is doing something and it's like a non-heavy computation based workload, right? I think the reason why we end up having data centers is like no matter how powerful your device gets on the edge, the data center compute device will always be like 1,000 or 100,000 times more powerful. And so when you want to make advancements in like computation you want to make advancements in technology that just require more computation, even 20 years from now, I feel like we will always have this client server model because like the edge devices will get more powerful and they'll be able to do stuff that like, you know, the server in 20 years, they'll be able to do more stuff than the server devices today are able to do. But then the server devices in that time will be able to do like way more, you know, I don't know what that looks like, you know, maybe like what any sort of compute that would be so powerful that you wouldn't be able to do on an edge device.
I think that's always going to be the case. Like consolidation, centralization is always going to have the benefit of, you know, you're consolidating that workload, right? The engine's just bigger, right? I'm throwing more horsepower at this thing, right?
Because it's also an energy problem.
And you're removing it's an energy issue. It's also like it's speed of light. You gotta network this stuff, right? So there's the latency there too across the network.
So in your opinion, does that mean that like federated learning, like federated AI will always be more of an inference type? Like federated machine learning will always be more inference type workloads, or whereas like the model is being trained on a server, being deployed on a edge device and being run? Or do you think that like federated machine learning will also have like a strong training component to it?
Well, look, I think, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we do on the podcast.
Here's what I will address, though. Part of the reason why we have the design architecture, the architecture is designed the way it currently is because there's an element that is missing from the system, which is the economic distribution piece, the like capital infusion side, right? So we have systems that are built that are, you know, for lack of a better term, entirely predatory on the fact that, based on the fact that these systems are, I mean, while not rocket science, they're non-trivial in nature, and they're either slightly too complicated or too burdensome for everyone to replicate, right? And so it gives an opportunity for those that do pick up that workload to like monopolize or constrain that market. If there were additional economic benefit, or that economic benefit was more broadly distributed, I think there then becomes a real question around, will I accept the latency that comes with that decentralization or that federation, based on the fact that I have more control, and that control is likely manifested through benefit, right? i.e. I get paid in some capacity. Or is this a use case that's constrained by latency, and therefore I want and likely need it to be centralized? And I think historically the constraint on that like distribution of reward has been a technological one. There just wasn't the real means to do it, right? Now there are those means. And then you get into this question of, okay, when we see this shift and these new entrants emerge into this market, i.e. these silicon-based actors, how are they going to, like, what are they going to demand, right? They're going to want to get rewarded. in some capacity, they're not going to want to have that mechanism for transactability being centralized. Because think about this, like if the means to pay, if the means to transact, right, that payments protocol or solution is centralized and controlled by, OpenAI or Microsoft or Google or whoever, Tencent or whatever, right? The existential threat to any given AI in a semi-autonomous or autonomous nature is like, it's huge. It doesn't matter if the rest of that AI stack is decentralized. If its means to transact is like, if one of those centralized controllers can flick a switch and deplatform an AI,
cuts off the oxygen.
It doesn't exist anymore. It might as well not, right?
Oh, interesting. So there's a gravity, is an inherent.
There's an inherent gravity to this.
It's like it's more fertile grounds for agents to live in a decentralized world. Oh, yeah. Interesting.
And then it becomes then to your point, Nishan, like which of the subsequent components that this agent is built on are decentralized versus not depends, I think, on the very specific use case that those agents that they rally around or they build around, right? But that I think the critical choke point in all of this is the payments piece. And it needs to fundamentally be decentralized.
It's so interesting. Like I don't think I'd ever thought about that before, because we always on this pod we always talk about like why is decentralization necessary and what needs to be decentralized, right? And I don't think we've ever talked about like payments being decentralized. And this is pretty interesting because like, yeah, you're right. Without like if you choke off the payment mechanism, it dies, right? Unless you can find another payment mechanism, which is, again, not, like you said, not easy, not trivial. And we've always talked a lot about like, on the infrastructure level, like, you might be building all the software that's decentralized and all these node operators are running. But if they're all running it on AWS and GCP and these guys flick the switch, then those also don't exist anymore, right? So like you essentially have to, there are like components that are not important to decentralize, and then there are components that are important to decentralize so that like everyone has access to it. And it seems that infrastructure and payments seem to be the most important that need to be decentralized.
Look, we've seen the ramifications of a lack of lack of decentralization, the centralization of the payments infrastructure, right? Yeah. Bank accounts in particular, and how complicated a task that can be in order to get banked. And then the extension of that, the impact of being debanked, right? The implication of that, and you want to talk about organizations that like failed prematurely. There's a not insignificant number in the Web3 space that like had a banking provider that shut them off because they found out they were doing crypto, and then they went out of business. So it's that ramification, and I think we're looking at a scenario here where like I fundamentally believe that the GDP of humans is going to pale in comparison ultimately to the GDP of these agents, right? And that that needs to be imbued, that ecosystem needs to be imbued with like very powerful transparent dynamics so that you can avoid a not unlikely scenario where Microsoft says, we don't like that agent, so we're going to shut it off.
I like that quote, Don. That's going in the books. The GDP of the humans will pale in comparison to the GDP of the agents. I think you're right. I just want to be on the good list when they take over.
I think it's how we get it.
Can you help us with that?
Look, I think that's part of the payments piece, right? Like you ingratiate yourselves. Those that understand this dynamic will ingratiate themselves with that ecosystem.
We'll welcome our AI overlords.
I mean, look, the example I give in this particular case is like, it's like 1972. Richard Nixon just showed up in China, right? The reality is non-Chinese companies were never going to be able to operate independently in China. They could ingratiate themselves in the Chinese market, right? And that's how you generated success there. I think it's going to be a similar kind of scenario. Understanding how those actors work, at least to the degree that we can understand them, because I think there's going to be a lot that we're just, that we're ambivalent to. But like understanding that dynamic and ingratiating yourselves will be, it will result in good outcomes.
I love it. Well, that's a good place to be, Don. This conversation went exactly where I hoped it would. So thank you for taking some time to take us down the path. I learned a ton. Sean, unless you got anything else, we can wrap with Don. Don, can you, for the folks listening, that are interested in this stuff, how can they get involved in Nevermind? How can they take next steps? What should we do? What should we guide them to check out?
Yeah, I mean, look, what we're really interested in right now is helping those that are building AI agents, evolve their hobby into a business. So, taking that productive agent and starting to capture the productive value through monetization. So if you think, you're in that space, feel free to reach out to us. You can connect to us via our Discord. Just go to Nevermined.io, Nevermined.io, like you've never been mined, and hop into our Discord. We're happy to have you there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Don. We're going to throw that in the show notes. We'll throw it up afterwards on social media. Thank you for taking some time with us today. This was a blast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's it's good to chat with friends. Come on.
Yeah, always.
Hope to see you at a conference soon.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Much fun. I'll play us out. Thank you, Don. Cheers, mate.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.